Our second grind comes all the way from tropical Costa Rica via a little layover in the equally beautiful Peak District, courtesy of Buxton Brewery with their extra coffee porter. Buxton are one of the big names that emerged from the early craft days, cooking up their very first mash on New Year's Day back in 2009. That's one hell of a New Year's resolution. Most of us can't even commit to a gym membership. And by January of the following year, Jeff Quinn had perfected a few recipes in the family's garage and was ready to get to work proper. Fast forward a decade or so, and here I am picking up his handiwork in local supermarkets. Although if memory does serve me correctly, I think I might actually have picked this one up down in Hastings, when we were down there for the huge Hastings Tap Takeover. And yes, with nearly 20 pubs, bars and bottle shops holding different breweries, we still found time to do a little shopping. Granted, some very, very drunk and very unnecessary shopping. Although without that snack-fueled pit stop, we wouldn't have the brew we have today. Here it is, the Costa Rican Coffee Extra Porter. Now that is some mouthful, and here's hoping the beer is too. Although I gotta say, you're not scoring many points when it comes to creativity of name. Guys, you gotta do a little better than that. But what I will say is they do redeem a few back with the can, as we have here a lovely spread of coffee beans, and what I can only assume is vanilla pods. Spin it round for a little look at the synopsis. Costa Rican Coffee Extra Porter. It's more of a description than a name, right? A rich, smooth porter brewed with cacao nibs, vanilla beans, so there you go, and Costa Rican Versace coffee. Now I must admit, I'm not much of an expert when it comes to coffee. Hell, I'm not much of an expert when it comes to beer either, but I'm sure you've picked up on that by now. But I definitely don't know squat about coffee, other than you press a button and it comes out a machine. So the subtle difference between, say, a Kenyan and a Costa Rican are completely lost on me. But I'm sure when things are all ground and roasted, they have much more in common than they do in differences. But let's find out what the Costa Rican's all about. Let's get pouring. So on the nose, I'm getting a little bit of a licorice in there. There's that coffee, of course, and a little bit of sweetness. Of course, there's that vanilla in there, so I'm guessing that's where it's coming from. There are some roasty notes in there too, whether that's coming from the coffee or the malts. So it is very smooth as soon as it hits the mouth, and then that coffee starts to take hold. And there are almost notes of berry in there too, before fading out to a real bitter black coffee. And it wasn't just the nose, there is a huge kick of licorice in the tail. Now, when it comes to coffee, I'm definitely more of an instant man, but in here, you can definitely get a sense they're using full bean. There isn't much of that sweetness or vanilla so far. Now, it weighs in at nearly 7.5%, and it does have a little sense that it has some weight behind it, but it's got a nice level of carbonation that keeps it from being a heavy drinking. And that carbonation mixed with that extra bitterness of black coffee really does prickle the tongue. And now we're down into the beer. The top notes are starting to develop a real bitter dark chocolate flavour. That coffee is still right there with a punch, and that bitter and licorice finish is still carrying on through to the end. And in those middles, you're getting some really roasty and toasted and smoky notes, almost burnt notes in there. And now we're down into the beer. Those dark chocolate notes are really trying to force their way into the tail. They're a lot more present than they were before, and there's almost, dare I say it, a sweetness and creaminess there. Or maybe that's just me acclimatizing to just how bitter that coffee is. Now, this one caught me a little off guard. I was expecting a big coffee punch. I just wasn't expecting it to be delivered by a sledgehammer. I hadn't expected those huge licorice notes, or just how bitter it really would be. That vanilla on the can was definitely subterfuge. And as things progress, there isn't much letting up. As on top of that coffee and licorice, roasted, smoky and burnt notes start to make their presence felt, adding further fuel to that very, very bitter bonfire. Now I thought I could take my coffee black, but this was like adding a shot of vinegar. And although that coffee does taste super fresh with fruity and berry notes to it, and those cacao nibs do add a certain chocolatey note, their presence is just far too subtle to be appreciated. And if chili food comes with a warning label, then I gotta tell you, stuff this bitter should come with one too. This was a brew definitely made for coffee lovers in mind, and as I'm more of a tea guy myself, it was just a little overbearing for me. But that said, I do work with a couple of people who do love their coffee, so I will be recommending this beer to them to see what they reckon, as I think they'll appreciate it a whole lot more than me.